Hi, it's Taylor T. Carlson, and I'm back with another video for you. Today we're going back to the Star Wars universe, and we're going to be taking a look at the first volume of Darth Vader, which Marvel released from 2015 to 2016. This comic spans 29 issues total, 25 issues of the main comic, an annual, the first issue of the Vader Down crossover arc, and then 2 issues of the main Star Wars comic, which were also part of the Vader Down crossover arc. This series is one of the first to begin being released after Marvel got back the license to make Star Wars comics from Dark Horse, and these started in early 2015. The Vader series came not long after the initial core Star Wars series began. That one ran for 75 issues plus several crossovers and finished up and was recently rebooted in a different timeline, which has also happened with Vader a few times. To date, there have been 3 series in the Marvel canon called Darth Vader. We're just going to be looking at the first one today. This comic, which was written by Kieran Gillen, is set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. I'm going to go over a brief synopsis of the comic storyline, so spoiler alert. If you haven't read these comics and you want to get the fresh experience, then I would probably go read them before you listen to what I have to say here. As I previously stated, this comic is set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. The Death Star has been destroyed, the Empire is in a state of chaos because of what happened, and Emperor Palpatine has put his foot down with Darth Vader, blaming him for the failure, as well as several recent rebel attacks on Imperial installations. As such, Darth Vader is demoted, and his superior is now one of the officers who was previously aboard the Death Star, but had survived the attack because he was off the planet at the time. Vader is sent back to his home planet of Tatooine, where he grew up as Anakin Skywalker, and he's sent to Jabba the Hutt's palace to negotiate for resources for the Empire, but he also arrives early because he has his own mission to attend to. He discovers the Emperor fraternizing with a strange human-alien hybrid man, and he hires 2 bounty hunters to go and investigate the matter. Meanwhile, he makes his negotiations and reports back to the Empire, only to find the Empire under attack. His investigations lead him to a woman named Dr. Aphra, who had commissioned battle droids for a group of smugglers who he ends up taking into his custody, and she agrees to help him out, agreeing to help him find the resources he needs so that he can wage his own private war and uncover the mysteries at hand. They find something from the Tarkin Initiative, which is a strange series of droids. There's 000, who is a protocol droid, not unlike C-3PO, except he's painted black and is equipped with all kinds of weird torture equipment and gets off on such a thing. There's also a BT unit, which is a astromech droid that's been outfitted for destruction, armed with all kinds of weapons. Following this, they head back to the planet Geonosis, where Vader, back when he was Anakin Skywalker, was in a major battle. Once here, they find the last surviving Geonosian queen, who has been sterilized, but she has something of a droid factory and considers the droids to be her children. Vader and Aphra then steal everything they need to create the droids, and they take what they can, go back to the Empire, and Vader continues his investigations. It turns out 000 actually interrogated the mysterious man that was with the Emperor to death, and Vader discovers something about replacements for him. He ends up going off and discovering that the mysterious man's name was Silo, and he's an Imperial scientist, and he has technology where when his body dies, he can awaken in another body from his secure base. He goes there, and the Emperor is there as well, with several mysterious beings that are being trained for something of potential replacements for Darth Vader. If the Emperor has one of these beings kill Vader, he'll have a more powerful new replacement. But if Vader rises to the occasion and stops them, it'll prove that he's everything the Emperor hoped he would be. Vader returns to his Star Destroyer, the Devastator, and he gets a visit from Boba Fett, who reports that he had lost a battle against the mysterious Force-sensitive pilot who destroyed the Death Star, but he did manage to get his name, which is Skywalker. Darth Vader, of course, instantly realizes this and puts the facts together and realizes that he's had a son all this time, even though the Emperor lied and said that Padme and his 2 children had died in childbirth, and Padme was even made to look as such at her funeral procession on Naboo. Vader then takes Aphra and heads back to Tatooine to check out the Lars homestead, as well as Obi-Wan Kenobi's former home, to get more clues. Further investigations continue into everything that's going on, and Vader's superior assigns him an adjutant, Inspector Thanoth, to report back on all of his dealings. As Vader quickly finds out, Thanoth is very intelligent and inquisitive, and he has to keep his under-the-table dealings even more secret now. However, the 2 of them do come to work together surprisingly well, all things considered. These investigations continue with Dr. Aphra taking the murder droids over to Naboo to interrogate the man who prepared Padme's body for the funeral, confirming that she did indeed have a son. However, he doesn't spill the beans that Padme also had a daughter, Luke's twin, Leia, who survived as well. And again, the investigations continue, and they go across the galaxy to a few more locations, and it's revealed that Commander Carbon, one of the other potential apprentice replacements, is setting up a trap for Vader. Aphra has discovered Luke's location on a planet called Vrogus Voss, which is actually a rebel base which features a Jedi temple. Vader sets out to pursue Luke there, and of course he makes short work of all the rebel pilots that are on training maneuvers in the area. Luke makes a kamikaze move, slamming his X-Wing into Vader's TIE Fighter, with the 2 of them crashing below on Vrogus Voss. And Leia, of course, sets out to have Vader killed, sending a whole platoon of rebel troopers, and Vader gets cornered on several occasions, but this ends with predictable results, namely a whole lot of dead rebels. Aphra learns of the rebels that are there, including Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and everyone else, and in predictable fashion, of course, their paths cross. Luke is on Vader's hit list. He wants to capture Luke so he can turn him to the dark side and overthrow the Emperor, and they set a trap in which 000 is painted gold to impersonate C-3PO, and he incapacitates Luke. However, Han Solo and Chewbacca come to the rescue. Eventually, Carbon arrives on the planet, and Vader does battle with him. Carbon has a cocky attitude and thinks he can win on account of having more lightsabers, being that he was somewhat modeled after General Grievous. But, of course, he goes toe-to-toe with Vader, and it ends about as well as you'd expect for Carbon. Eventually, Carbon's troops manage to capture Luke, who they're planning on keeping from Vader, but Vader manages to stop the shuttle, and eventually our core rebel heroes escape. During the process, they manage to capture Dr. Aphra. With all the secrets that she knows, Vader, of course, has to put out a call to bounty hunters so that they can get her back and return her to the Empire. Vader is then given a new assignment by Palpatine to report to a planet called Shu-Torun, which is where ore miners live who have had their quotas drastically increased over the years. In the past, prior to the Vader Down arc, the events of the Annual have Vader going to this planet, dispatching the reckless ones who have challenged the Empire, and making the king's youngest daughter into the new queen, who's something of a puppet of the Empire, but still seen as the leader of her people. Vader is asked to go with Silo and some of the potential replacement candidates for the apprenticeship at the Emperor's side, including 2 humans that have been augmented and now have cybernetic enhancements as well as lightsabers. They end up going into battle, and of course, the rebels on the planet put up a pretty high level of resistance, and Vader and Trios, the queen who had been appointed by Vader, wage war, and there's plenty of casualties, but it also reaches a point where these 2 humans who want to be the Emperor's apprentice end up going into competition with one another, and the young female ends up getting killed, and she gives her data to Darth Vader so that he can analyze that and see that Dr. Silo and General Taj, who is now his superior, are in fact traitors to the Empire. Eventually they triumph in this battle, with Vader leaving a stormtrooper with Trios and eventually returning to the Emperor, who is now aboard the Executor, a super star destroyer which is to be Taj's flagship. The Emperor delivers a speech that claims that this is what he expected to happen all along and how Vader has proven himself, with Vader, of course, challenging the Emperor and claiming if any one of them had survived, you'd simply be making this speech to them. Vader then heads back to Silo's fleet, which consists of these strange, living, technology hybrid whale ships, and he encounters Toulon Voidgazer, who is one of the other potential apprentices. She's not a fighter, but she has technology on her side, and she's augmented a Rancor with the equipment that she used to previously mind control a Trandoshan in the arena during which time they'd first met. Vader finds plenty of resistance from this Rancor. It's even immune to his Force Choke abilities. However, he's able to sever the link and eventually turn Toulon's technology against her. He then dispatches Morit, the male who's been augmented with the cybernetic attachments and lightsaber, leaving no apprentices other than himself. He then confronts Dr. Silo, but discovers a terrible truth. Dr. Silo is the one who created Darth Vader's life support armor, the thing that's keeping him alive. He pulls out a failsafe switch and uses it to deactivate Darth Vader's armor, essentially leaving him immobile and potentially killed by Silo. Inside of Darth Vader, there's a conflict going on between the good and bad and all his memories of the past. He's trying to destroy the one little bit of good that remains in him so he can fully embrace the dark side. That, of course, will play a role later on when he redeems himself and sacrifices himself to save his son in Return of the Jedi. However, what Silo doesn't know is technology alone is not enough, and Vader manages to use the Force to regain his consciousness, and he kills Silo, who of course awakens in another body. He then attempts to go after Silo and uses a mind trick on the brain of the whale ship to send Silo and all his surviving potential bodies into a sun. He then returns to meet Palpatine, at which point the traitors have been dealt with, and Vader tells him the Executor, which was to be Taj's flagship, will now be his, as we see in The Empire Strikes Back. Vader is left to deal with Taj as he pleases, and, of course, Force chokes him to death, intimidating the hell out of Admiral Ozzel, who we also remember from the Executor in The Empire Strikes Back and his eventual fate. Vader makes his demands and stands on the bridge of the Executor, seeing a vision of Luke. At this point, Vader has also sent Dr. Aphra into an airlock after having had the droids bring her back to the Empire when she divulged secrets to the Emperor, although he kept the secret of Luke safe. Aphra, unbeknownst to Vader, actually manages to survive using some of the technology that one of the bounty hunters and the murder droids had hatched up, which of course sets the tone for Dr. Aphra to star in her own series, which we'll look at another day. There's also a brief Coda story in here, which looks at the aftermath of some Tusken Raiders that Vader had killed on Tatooine, and we get to see their ritual and how they deal with what had happened. Okay, I said that was going to be a brief synopsis of the events of this 29-issue comic. That wasn't exactly brief, but you get a pretty good idea of what was going on. Now, like I've said in previous reviews, I'm not really good at remembering the names of comic book authors and artists, but Kieran Gillen apparently is someone who's a pretty big deal in the comic book world, especially having worked with Marvel in the past. I got looking, and even after he did this, he actually worked on one of those newer James Bond comics that's coming out, so this is a guy that definitely gets around. Rewriting the character of Darth Vader and adding to his mythos is no easy task, but Gillen definitely proved himself to be up for it and then some. This beautifully fleshes out Darth Vader, really shows how he goes from being an enforcer in A New Hope to being a person in a much higher position of power in The Empire Strikes Back. A character like Darth Vader is not funny or comical in the least because of his dark, brooding backstory, but they definitely managed to bring humor into the story thanks to the pair of murder bots, 000 and BT. These two are absolutely hilarious. Dark, demented, essentially the evil versions of C-3PO and R2-D2. They're extremely violent, but at the same time, I found myself laughing almost every time they were in the comic. Likewise, this is the comic that introduces Dr. Aphra to the Star Wars dimension, and she's become something of a runaway success character, and I'll definitely be getting more into her when I decide to review her comic, but she's definitely opened a lot of doors for this universe, and she's become a fan favorite, and with good reason. One truly impressive thing, not just limited to the Darth Vader comic, but the new Marvel Star Wars comics in general, is how they managed to tie together all the different eras of Star Wars. This is set in the classic trilogy era, but like, you'll see things like battle droids pop up, you'll see the planet Geonosis, you'll see flashbacks to Vader back when he was still Anakin, back before he suffered his injuries. And there's even a scene right before Inspector Thanoth is executed by Darth Vader for all he knows and believes. And he states that Vader would be better for the Empire, and the Empire shouldn't be limited to the Emperor. This actually sounds very similar to what would become the First Order in the sequel trilogy. And hell, even Thanoth admits that he somehow found out that Darth Vader was really Anakin Skywalker, which of course leads to his prompt execution. Despite running for 29 issues, like I said, there were 25 core issues, an annual, the Vader Down crossover initial issue, and then 2 issues of the core Star Wars comic, which were also part of the Vader Down crossover. The comic flies by, and it's a quick read despite its length. It's very entertaining. I think Star Wars fans are going to be really happy with what they read here. You have a few options if you want to buy this comic. You can obviously get the issues digitally, which has become very popular these days. You can hunt down the individual volumes, which is going to be harder now because they're out of print, although some were republished with slightly different color schemes on the covers. Or the 5 arcs were actually combined into trade paperbacks. There's one for Vader, which was the first arc, Shadows and Secrets, which was the second arc, the Vader Down crossover, the Shu-Torun War, which was the 4th arc overall, and then End of Games, which was the 5th and final arc of this series, which ended with issue 25. Or there's actually 2 hardbound volumes. I've actually got these, so I'll show you these real quick. This is actually a variant cover, but this has the first 2 arcs, so the first 12 issues total. Yeah, there's the spine, and then back cover. And then the second volume of the hardcover, this has the Vader Down crossover plus the latter 2 arcs that followed that. There's the spine, and there's the back cover. There's also an omnibus which combines all of the arcs, all of the comics that are a part of this story into one big hardbound volume, which I may eventually sell my 2 smaller hardbound volumes and buy that one. Now, when Marvel started releasing their Star Wars comics, I would buy every single individual issue they put out, every variant I could find, and of course the trade paperbacks and hardcovers that were released later on. Due to finances, I had to stop doing that, and I ended up selling off a lot of my collection, but I did keep some of my favorite variants and editions, so I'll show off a few of these that I've got in my collection right now. This is the first edition of the very first volume of the comic, which came out back in 2015. This is issue 3 of the comic, first edition, first appearance of Dr. Aphra, and of course the murder bots down there. This was a director's cut version of issue 1, which has some interesting behind-the-scenes stuff in it. It's just talking with the creators of the comic. This is a variant of issue 7. This has like a monochrome color scheme, whereas the original release had the full color. This is a variant for the initial issue of Vader Down. Another variant for the initial issue of Vader Down. This has got Vader scoring off against Jackson the Rabbit, a character from all the old Marvel Star Wars comics back in the day, long before Dark Horse had the license. We've got another Vader Down initial issue, which has the Rebel heroes together with Leia leading the way. Darth Vader issue 13 with the murder droids and Stormtroopers. This was part of the Vader Down crossover. Issue 15 of Darth Vader, also part of the Vader Down crossover, Luke wielding his lightsaber. This was the first issue of the End of Games arc, which ended up being the final arc. This actually has a misprint because it says the Shu-Torun War on the crawl text page, which was actually the previous arc that had already been finished by this point. This is that same comic, but a variant cover with the story so far, as it claims here, and it's got some images from various stories that came before this. This is probably my personal favorite variant cover. This is a Dr. Silo action figure cover. They've done a lot of these retro action figure style covers, and I think they're my favorite of the variants. Yeah, as you can see, there are a ton and a half of all the variant covers, not just for this comic, but almost everything that Marvel's put out since they got back the Star Wars license. Since we are on a bit of a halt as far as new comic book releases go on account of the pandemic in the world, I'm making an effort to go through and review all my Star Wars comics in the new Marvel canon that I've gotten to date. There are so many arcs so far. I mean, there's literally hundreds of comics already in the past 5 years that Marvel's had the license back. They're all official and canon, except for the reissues of older material that's not canon, but there is some interesting stuff here, and if you are a fan, these are absolutely worth checking out. The Darth Vader stories in the core Darth Vader series, this is Volume 1. They've been some of my absolute favorite stories. There's a Volume 2 of Darth Vader that's set between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, and I'll be covering that in one of my future reviews, as well as Darth Vader Volume 3, which is currently only 2 issues in, and it's set between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. There are also some other sort of Vader side stories, including Target Vader, which focuses on a bounty hunter going after Vader, as well as another series of individual, like one-off vignette anthology type stories. And again, I'll be looking at all of those in future reviews. Have you had a chance to read Kieran Gillen's Darth Vader comic? Were you a fan? Were you not a fan? Have you not checked out the story, but now you're interested? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Also, like this video and subscribe to my channel if you're a Star Wars fan, because there's plenty more comic reviews on the way. I'm Taylor T. Carlson, and I will definitely see you for my next Star Wars review.